य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्मिमाणः निर्मिमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनाद्यपि कश्चन एतद्द्वैता 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 एतद्द्वैता.
Welcome to today's VCM on FEMA, Complete NRI Perspective and Udyam Registration. I thank today's chief guest, CA K. Jalapati sir, Vice Chairman of SARC of ICAI, and today's faculty, G. Sudha Bhushan Madam, and CA VMV Subbarao sir. Welcome all. So before going to that, I request to our branch chairman, I Vamsi Krishna sir, to give his opening remarks.
On behalf of the Managing Committee of Nellore Branch of SARC of ICAI, good evening and a warm welcome to all members. First of all, I would like to thank our chief guest, CA Jalapati Garu, who is a Vice Chairman of SARC. And also, I would like to welcome our today's faculty, Ms. Sudha Bhushan Garu, who is an eminent speaker on FEMA. She has authored many books like Due Diligence on FEMA, Practitioner's Guide to Foreign Exchange Management, Comprehensive Guide on International Transactions, etc. And also, I would also welcome our second session speaker, VMV Subbarao Garu, who is like a brother to all our Nellore branch members. With this, I thank all the participants, members who have voluntarily joined for today's seminar. And lastly, I would like to thank all the faculty and all the delegates who have joined us on today's webinar after our short notice. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. And now I request our branch treasurer, CS Lakshmi Prasanna Madam, to introduce today's faculty to the audience.
Thank you. Madam Sudha G. Bhushan is a qualified chartered accountant, company secretary, and an insolvency resolution professional, a registered valuer, and she is an independent women director registered with MCA. She is co-founder of Taxpert Professionals, a multi-faced consulting company. She is advisory to Bank of Baroda, NRI, and international operations. She is independent director with Auron Pro Solutions Limited, a global company in technology solutions. She is advisor to lot of big multinational companies. She is co-chairman of Business Next Committee at Indian Merchant Chamber. She is member of Indo-French Chamber of Commerce and Industry. She had been member of Committee of International Taxation of WIRC, Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, member of Editorial Committee of WIRC of ICAI and Committee of Women Empowerment of ICAI. She has 2 decades of experience in audit and assurance with expertise in Foreign Exchange Management Act, International Transaction Advisory, Structuring and Regulatory Affairs. She has authored following books on the subject: International Transactions, a comprehensive review published by CCH; Due Diligence under Foreign Exchange Management Act 1999, published by CCH; Comprehensive Guide to Foreign Exchange Management in 2 volumes, published by CCH; Practical Guide to Foreign Exchange Management, published by CCH, a Walter Kluwer's company; Practical Aspects of Foreign Direct Investment in India, published by Institute of Company Secretaries of India; Handbook of Foreign Exchange Management Act 2000, publication of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Handbook on International Taxation, publication of Institute of Company Secretaries of India. A scholar throughout her life, she has been awarded many awards and recognitions, including Women Empowerment through CA Profession by Northern India Regional Council of CA Institute. She is a noted speaker and has addressed various national and international forums on the topics from digital taxes to cross-border mergers. Her articles are regularly published in journals of several institutes like IMC, ICAI, etc. Her experience is gained by extensive working with international firms. She has extensive experience of handling business transactions from initial public offer to foreign direct investment. She advises corporates, PSUs, as well as government authorities in lot of intricate transactions, rendering tax and internal transactions involving issues revolving around forex laws, tax, repatriation, minimization of tax exposure, foreign investments, etc. She is visiting faculty of various prestigious business schools. Thank you, ma'am. With this, I welcome to the today's seminar.
Thank you, madam. I request today's faculty to take over the session.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Vamsi Krishna, for inviting me to the branch, and Mr. Chinnamastan, so many thanks for giving such a, introducing me to the branch, and Ms. Lakshmi for giving the introduction, and Mr. Jalapati to take out time and being with us. So many thanks for that, sir. And thank you, Sujit and Arunji and everyone else. And special thanks to definitely all the Mr. Subbarao-ji as well. And special thanks to all the participants who have taken out time today in this COVID times to be here and to be very willing to learn about a subject which is not too much practice. So I hope I'm able to do the justice to the subject. And I've been, as said, so I've been in the subject so much that people, if you don't type my name, if you don't save my name, and the true caller, it will show Sudha Fema. So instead of my name Sudha Bhushan, it shows Sudha Fema. So that's the subject I have been practicing. So let us start today's session, and we'll go ahead and understand the various aspects of FEMA. I'm just sharing my screen.
Yeah, 1 second.
So as far as FEMA is concerned, so FEMA is the law to manage the foreign exchange. It's not something which is similar, as Jalapati sir, he rightly mentioned that it's not something which is similar to income tax. Income tax is a revenue act, while FEMA is an act to regulate the foreign exchange. So basically the objective of two laws are totally different, and why we are trying to compare these two laws to understand that when we are talking about FEMA, it is more about discussion of whether a particular transaction can be undertaken or the transaction cannot be undertaken. So particularly when it comes to FEMA, it is foreign exchange management. So RBI have mostly given its power to the AD bank, that is authorized persons. So the RBI works through authorized person, which in turn are quite a few types that are there. And the authorized person can be in different forms, which is which may be a category 1, category 2 authorized. So basically, what we are talking about is that authorized FEMA. The main people, the main authority under FEMA is two. That is, one is the Reserve Bank of India, and second authority which is there is the central government. And how the central government works? Central government works through its various ministries. So the ministries have been given, there are mainly two ministries which deals with, FEMA is a transactional law. Every transaction, one has to see whether it is allowed or whether it is not allowed. So as we see in income tax, that whether there is a tax on that income or there is no tax on the income. Like in income tax, all the income is divided into 5 heads. All the income is divided into 5 heads. Why I'm comparing FEMA with income tax? Again, because we understand income tax. So it's good to compare that, so to give the understanding. Now, so like in income tax, there are all the transactions are divided into 5, all the income is divided into 5 heads. Under FEMA, all the transactions are divided into two heads. One is current and one is capital. So that's anything that you have to start under FEMA will start with 2 things, that either a transaction is a current account transaction or it's a capital account transaction. So if a transaction is categorized as a current account, you don't have to check whether it is allowed or not allowed. It will be allowed until unless it is prohibited. However, if a transaction is a capital account transaction, it is prohibited until unless it is allowed. So that's the edifice on which the whole structure, that's the foundation on which the whole structure of FEMA is based. Capital account and current account. That's how the whole structure of FEMA is based on. So whenever we are undertaking any transaction with regard to foreign exchange, whenever an entity is undertaking any transaction with regard to foreign exchange, or whenever an individual who is resident, non-resident, permanently, not permanently resident in India, or a person OCI, PI, whatever type of entity it is, one has to first see whether a transaction is a current account or capital account and whether it is allowed for them or it is not allowed for them. And we were discussing about, before we enter into our topic of discussion today, it is very essential that we have some foundation with regard to the basic format of FEMA, how the framework of FEMA works and how the various authority under FEMA work. So I was talking about, when we got disconnected, I was talking about that under FEMA, it works through 2 authorities major, RBI and Reserve Bank of India and Government of India. Reserve Bank of India and Government of India, and their powers are basically delegated. Means what RBI will do and what Reserve Bank of India, what RBI will do and what Government of India will do, it's very nicely bifurcated in section 46 and section 47. So whatever they are doing is bifurcated. Now, in that respect, major delegation that is with regard to the powers that has been given to Reserve Bank of India, there has been a recent shift from the power that was there to Reserve Bank of India, and there is a shift to central government. So we'll talk about it when the need arises. So RBI, it functions through AD Bank. AD banks are basically the authorized person. So RBI functions through authorized persons. There are different categories of authorized persons. So these categories of authorized persons are AD Bank, AD category Bank 1, AD category 2, AD category 3, FFMCs, and then after that there are offshore units. So these, what they can do and what they cannot do, this Reserve Bank's authorized person, will depend on their licenses, for what they have got the license. So their powers will be dependent on the license that they have got, for what they have got the registration. And it depends, like AD category 1 bank will be authorized to do every capital and current account transaction. The FMMCs are authorized to undertake, that is full-fledged money changers. They are authorized to undertake only very few transactions relating to selling of foreign exchange to the people who are going outside India for visit. So their scope is very limited. So that's how the powers are delegated, and Government of India, it frames the various rules like compounding rules. They have been recently delegated the power of making the rules relating to the investment. So that's how it functions. Functions. And very briefly on the history of FEMA, it was FERA. We all know that before FEMA, it was Foreign Exchange Regulation Act. So regulation, when it means, that means it was regulated. The foreign exchange was, instead of being managed, it was regulated. And there was lots of restriction on the drawal of foreign exchange. That for very limited purposes, the foreign exchange was allowed to be drawn. How the framework of FEMA is overall laid down is we have master directions, we have circulars, we have notifications, and we have regulations, we have rules under FEMA. So whenever we are looking into a transaction from whosoever perspective, be it an NRI, be it a OCI, or be it a company entity, whatever we are looking at, we have to look into the act, that is FEMA Act, and the notification, the relevant notification. So FEMA comes up with the notifications, and the RBI comes with notification, and the central government comes with rule relating to any particular transaction, and one has to look into those rules or regulations to see whether the transaction is allowed or not allowed. So, and how is it allowed? How is it allowed? One more thing will be relevant to state here, that when we are looking into anything relating to FEMA, the Act does not have all the definitions. So the definition, few definitions are there in the regulation, depending on where the use of that definition is. For example, there are certain terms which are used only in the overseas direct investment regulation, like Indian Party. So when they are using Indian Party, they are talking about the entities which can make investment outside India. So that's a particular use of term which is there. So that's how we'll see. So today, how I have planned to discuss today and tomorrow, 2 days, that we should be able to discuss everything relating to the NRI as an entity under FEMA. NRI as an entity under FEMA. So if you see NRI, we'll be discussing the definition. We'll be discussing the residential status. We'll be discussing about the immovable property, borrowing and lending and deposits, remittance of current assets and assets by NRIs, and there are to do's and not do's for NRIs, which will also cover the rules and regulations relating to returning and emigrating Indians, because nowadays it is since we are seeing there's so much happening nowadays with regard to the returning Indians. So it is good for all of us to understand so that we are able to advise them that what they should be doing when it comes to the returning Indians. Now this is a procedural, more of a procedural law. So what I would request, that I would be finishing today's session little early, say 20 minutes early, so that we can have a question answer session, so that I can understand the questions that people are facing in this area, and we can take it either today or tomorrow. I was talking about when we're talking about the NRI particularly. So there are various type of entities under FEMA: NRI, OCI, PIO, person resident in India, person not resident in India. So as I said, each term will be dependent on how it is used. So there is a term that they have used in foreign investment in India. So in the NDI regulation, they have used this term Indian entity. So Indian entity in that regulation is used for the purpose of when we are talking about the downstream investment. So under FEMA, each term, the way it is used, it has to be understood like that only. So let us go and understand now. The first thing to start is to understand the residential status. Who is an NRI and why is he an NRI, whether he is an NRI. So very, very essential to understand the concept of residential status under FEMA. So the residential status under FEMA is divided into three parts: individual, incorporated, body corporate, and office and branch or agency in India of a person outside India, and outside India of a person in India. So residential status talks in three different buckets. One is individual, body corporate, which are incorporated in India, office, branch, or agency. So we will be concentrating on the residential status of individual, as well as all the body corporates that are incorporated in India are constituted as resident in India, and office, branch, or agency of a person who is resident outside India. If the office, branch, or agency is in India, it is constituted as the resident in India. So there is nothing much to understand there. And however, FEMA has the extra jurisdictional rights when it says that any office, branch, or agency outside India which is controlled and owned by a person resident in India, on that also FEMA is applicable. So to that extent, FEMA has extra jurisdictional rights. What will it mean? It will mean that a branch office outside India will also be governed by the provisions of FEMA, and it will not be able to do anything which the Indian entity is not able to do as per the provisions under FEMA. So let us go and understand the concept of residential status under FEMA. Residential status. Before we go and enter into the definition, few things are relevant. We are used to the understanding that residential status is a yearly thing. We are used to understanding that residential status is an yearly thing. However, as far as FEMA is concerned, the residential status is a transaction-based thing. It is at a point of a time. It is at a point of a time, and every time a person is executing a transaction, the residential status needs to be checked. So it is a transactional thing as far as FEMA is concerned, and it's not a yearly thing. It's determined on a yearly basis. However, under FEMA, residential status is a transactional thing. Let us understand the definition of a resident. That means that that is when a person will be constituted as a person resident in India. Why do we want to understand this? Why do we want to understand the definition of person resident in India? Because a person resident in India will have certain benefits and certain drawbacks as far as FEMA is concerned. So certain benefits, like a person resident in India is able to buy an agricultural land, or he is able to buy immovable property without any restriction. But what is the restriction there? That he cannot remit more than 250,000. So it is important USD per financial year. So it is very essential to understand the definition of person resident in India. As the definition says under section 2, subsection 5, clause 1, which deals with the residential status of an individual, it says there are three limbs in the definition: residing in India for more than 182 days during the course of preceding financial year, but does not include going out of India or staying outside India for taking up employment, for carrying business or vocation, for any other purpose in such circumstances as would indicate his intention to stay outside India for uncertain period. The second clause says that coming to India or staying in India otherwise than for taking up employment, for carrying business or vocation, for any other purpose in such circumstances as would indicate his intention to stay outside India for uncertain period. What does it mean? See, the definition has basically three limbs. The first limb talks about the period of stay condition. The first limb talks about the period of stay condition in the preceding financial year. What does it talk? That to be resident in India, in 2019-20, so when we talk about financial year, it is April to March. So when we are talking about that residential status in 2019-20, the person has to be resident in India in 2018-19 for a period of more than 182 days. So that's something we are able to understand well. It's a simple definition that we have, that a person should be in India for a period of more than 182 days in the preceding financial year. Understood. Now, there are two exceptions to this definitions which are little difficult to understand and which confuses us a bit. Let us slowly understand that. The second limb of transaction, now this definition, what does it say? It says that first limb is a period of stay, and the other two limbs that are there that are exception to the period of stay. Now in second limb, it talks about people who are leaving India. So residents who are leaving India, or maybe non-resident, but people leaving India. Third limb talk about people coming to India. So if the person is leaving India for these purposes, that is taking employment, doing any business, or staying for the purpose of staying in India for uncertain period, in that case, even if the person has stayed in India for more than 182 days in the preceding year, even in that case, even if the person has not stayed in India, even if the person have not stayed in India for more than 182 days, even in those cases, he'll be considered as the non-resident. So, so second link talks about a person who is leaving India. He was there in the preceding financial year. He was there in India for a period of 182 days. Even though he was there, however, still he will be considered as non-resident from the date of his leaving, from the date when he has left India. So although he is there for 182 days in India, but if he is leaving for these three purposes, that is taking employment, doing any business, staying for uncertain period, in that case, he will be considered as non-resident from the day he has left India. So this was about the person who is leaving India. Now let us see the person who has come to India. Let us see the person who has come to India. Now, coming to India except for taking employment, doing any business, staying for uncertain period. Now, in this case, he will be considered as resident if he has come for taking employment, doing any business and staying for an uncertain period, even though he has not complied with the first limb of the transaction. So first limb of the transaction, even if he was not there for 182 days in the preceding financial year, but in this year he has come to India for taking employment, in that case he will be construed as a resident from the day he has come to India. So we keep on getting queries like there is a person who was there in Australia for quite substantial time, and he has shifted to India now, and he has come to India now. Whether he can open the savings bank account with the bank. Whether he can, so he has come to India on 31st of August 2019. He has come to India on 31st of August 2019. Whether he can open the savings bank account with the bank. He is otherwise a Indian citizen. Now, whether he can open this savings bank account, whether he can open this savings bank account with the bank, since he is a person, it will depend also on whether he has come for doing business in India, or he has shown that he has come for the purpose for the stay for uncertain period. In this case, if he has come for the employment or with the intention to permanently settle in India, in that case, the saving bank account can be opened and he can be taken as a resident. So the third limb, it talks about people who are coming to India. If it is that they are not coming to India for these purposes, they are not coming to India for these purposes. In that case, they need to satisfy the first limb to be resident. Now let us see it with an example. Mr. Rakesh, an Indian national, takes up employment with a company in US and migrates to New York. What will be the residential status of Mr. Rakesh? So Mr. Rakesh was in India in the preceding financial year. He was a resident. He was in whole of the 365 days. He was in India. Now on 10th of April, he is now going outside India for taking up employment with a US company. What will be his residential status as on 10th of April? So his residential status is going to be non-resident, even though he was in India in the preceding financial year. He was in India for more than 182 days because he is going out for the purpose of taking employment. Therefore, he is falling under the second limb of the definition of non-person resident in India. Now, this Rekha Rakesh shift to New York to stay with her husband. Now, he is a wife of Mr. Rakesh, and she is also shifting to New York to stay with her husband now. What will be her residential status? Now, she is not shifting for doing any employment. She is not shifting for business, but she is shifting because she is shifting for an uncertain period for the purpose which shows the stay for uncertain period. Now, what happens that Mr. Rakesh, he ultimately wants to work in India only. So Mr. and Mrs. Rakesh, after 10 years, they come back to India. They come back to India on 1st April 2020. They came back to India it was not possible, maybe there were no flights at that time. But however, let us assume that that they came back to India to permanently, or they were asked to leave the country wherever they were. So they came back to India on 1st of April 2020. Now, what will be the residential status of Mr. Rakesh and Mrs. Rakesh as on 1st of April 2020? Now, let us see that. Were they there in the more than 182 days? They were not there. They were not there. However, let us see the third limb of the transaction. They are coming to India for the purpose of staying in India, for the uncertain period, which makes them the person resident in India from the date of their arrival, irrespective of the fact that they were not there for 182 days in the preceding financial year. Now, Mr. Vijay, he's another person. So he's a development manager in the company and he works in Mumbai. And so he's been sent to outside India for 6 months to USA for export promotion tour. He's been sent to USA on export promotion tour for 6 months. What will be his residential status? Now, in this case,
please see that Mr. Vijay, he is in Mumbai. So in preceding financial year, he is a resident. He is in for 365 days. He is going. Now he is going outside India, not for employment, not for taking employment, not for doing any business, and also his going for 6 months. So therefore, his residential status shall not change. Again, why it is essential to determine whether the residential status is changing or not, because when we will see, when we are doing the emigrants and immigrants being from India and in India, we will see that there are certain duties and responsibilities casted on the people who are changing their residential status. Okay, now Mr. Vijay, he joins the company in New York as a partner and shifts his residence. What happens in that case? He becomes non-resident because his period of stay outside India is not known. He has started a business there, so he is gone on a business. Therefore, this person will be treated as a non-resident. Mr. Dilip is a manager in CCI and is deputed to New York office. See, there are two. He is deputed to New York office. That means he is going on employment to New York. Therefore, his residential status will change on the day he is shifting to New York, irrespective of his period of stay in the preceding financial year. I hope it was clear. Examples here, Mr. A, an American national, has taken an employment in Bank of America, Mumbai. What happens to his residential status? So his residential status, he becomes resident as soon as he comes to India. Mr. Anand, a non-resident, comes to India for marriage of his 2 children and intends to leave India soon thereafter. His stay in India continues for more than 18 months and more than 6 months in each of the past 2 years. So if you see Mr. Anand, he has come to India for marriage of his 2 children, and the purpose of his visit is certain, and he is going to go out of India as soon as that purpose is served. So he can establish that he is non-resident because the purpose is served, the purpose is known, and he is not come for an employment, he is not come for business. Therefore, he can prove that he is a non-resident Indian. There is this practical example that is Mr. S. Khan has resided in India during the financial year 15-16 for less than 182 days. He had come to India on April 1st, 2016 for employment. What could be his residential status during the financial year 16-17? So you may take this question and we'll discuss it tomorrow. Let me, we'll see it tomorrow. Now there is another thing, that there is Mr. Reddy. He is a student and he goes for higher studies for a period of 3 years. He goes for higher studies for a period of 3 years. Now what happens, as we know that as soon as a person goes out of India for employment, for business, or a period which shows uncertain period. However, in case of a student, it is not an uncertain period. It is always a certain period for which the student goes outside India. So how will it matter? How will it matter? A student, he never goes outside India for an unlimited period or for an uncertain period. The student goes outside India if he is a student. Obviously, the course in which he is getting enrolled or things or the curriculum, it is for a limited period, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever period it is limited and it is known. So he doesn't become the resident. He doesn't become the non-resident because his period of stay is certain. Now, there was because of this, there was problem that was faced by the students
because residents have lot of limitations, that they cannot take loan, they cannot go and do business, they cannot. So being a resident, they had lot of limitations as in undertaking employment, getting the funding from their parents. So there was a circular of RBI dated 88th of December 2013, in which it was notified that although the period of stay of a student is certain, they shall be treated as non-resident. They shall be treated as non-resident, as immediately if he goes abroad for an uncertain period on his stays abroad exceeding 182 days in the preceding financial year. So this was the facility, this was the circular that had come in 2003, particularly for students. Under FEMA, there is the whole of the concept of residential status, it depends on the intention as well as the period of stay. At some places, it is the intention which is important. However, depending on a transaction, if you see the government along with RBI or RBI along with the government has notified that the period of stay is equally important. For example, in case of a person who comes to India, so we have discussed the residential status, and what we are discussing right now, the few exceptions or the offshoots from the residential status, which signifies that intention as well as period of stay, both are important and both are signified at one place or other depending on their relevance. For example, in the master direction, if the person who is resident outside India, if a person who is an NRI, he comes to India, he has to immediately respond upon his return. He has to immediately inform to the AD bank about his change in residential status. That goes to say that the period of stay in the preceding financial year is absolutely of no relevance in certain cases. However, in contrast to that, in case of a determination of residential status for the acquisition of immovable property, RBI specifically says that it is essential that the person should be in India in the preceding year for more than 182 days. So therefore, what I want to say here is that there is no specific, as far as the intention is concerned. So RBI has been using it basis the transaction it is needed for. As far as the conversion of NRE account to RFC account or NRO account to the regular account, it is immediate, or it is the immediate effect that the residential status of the person changes from the NRI to resident. However, when it comes to the acquisition of immovable property, because it should not happen that a person is coming to India and showing that he is on employment just for the purpose of acquiring the immovable property in India and then selling it off and doing other speculation activities. So to avoid that, in case of acquisition of immovable property, they have also made it compulsory that besides the intention of employment or business or uncertain period, it is essential that there has to be satisfaction of period of stay condition as well. So the onus is on the individual to prove his residential status if it is not questioned by any authority. There is I have seen that lot of confusion regarding the terms NRI, PIO, OCI. People either so let us devote some time in understanding what are these terms exactly are. what we discussed is the person resident in India. We discussed the residential status and person resident in India. Any other person who is not person resident in India as specified under Section 2B of the Foreign Exchange Management Act shall be construed as the person resident outside India. Shall be construed as the person resident outside India. Now, we are talking now about these terms NRI, PIO, OCI. Let us understand what are these terms and why are these terms relevant and what are these terms. So NRI. NRI is a non-resident Indian. NRI is a non-resident Indian. He has been defined. The term non-resident Indian is defined in different regulations differently, depending on the need of the regulation. So it has not been defined in the Act. The term NRI, OCI, PIO has not been defined in the Act. It has been defined differently in the different regulation. However, it has been now mostly it's in sync with each other in most of the regulations. So the term as had been defined in the deposit regulation, that is, it's defined as NRI as a person outside India who is a citizen of India. NRI as a person outside India who is a citizen of India. So the main difference between NRI and PIO and OCI is that NRIs are the citizen of India and PIO and OCIs are not the citizens of India. They are not the citizens of India. Earlier, what was the case that NRI at some places, it included PIOs. So the status of NRI, the status of PIO was put equivalent to NRIs at all the places. It is the case right now as well. However, the PIO have been excluded now from all the places. We will see why. So right now the PIO stands excluded from all the places. The way it has been defined under the Foreign Exchange Management Non-Debt Instruments Rules 2019, it is non-resident Indians means an individual resident outside India who is a citizen of India. Now, what we were talking about is that first previously what was said, there were two terms, PIO and OCIs. PIO and OCIs. However, with the 7th Amendment Act, Citizenship Amendment Act, which came in force on 6th of June 2015, these two terms, PIO and OCI, were clubbed together. These two terms, OCI and PIO, were clubbed together. So what exactly did it mean that, so NRI are basically citizens of India who are resident outside India. So those people who are citizens of India, however, they are not just residing in India, they are in Canada, UK, wherever they are not residing in India, they are citizens. They are citizens of India. PIO are the people who are resident outside India and who are resident of any other country, who are resident of any other country and who are not the citizens of India. However, the PIO status is not allowed to be given to any person from Bangladesh, Pakistan, or such other country as may be specified by the central government. So who are PIO? Before we read the definition, the logic of PIO is that any person whose forefathers has been in India. So if the persons Mr. Z's grandfather shifted to UK to do a business, then Mr. X, because his grandfather was from India, he is a person of Indian origin. Let us read this definition, and then we will, after understanding these three definitions, we will understand that what is the significance of these terms and how it is different or similar as far as FEMA is concerned. So the definition of PIO as it is defined under section 5R, which deals with deposits, it says that they are the person resident outside India who is a citizen of any other country other than Bangladesh or Pakistan and satisfies these conditions, which are who was a citizen of India by virtue of Constitution of India or the Citizenship Act 1955, or who belonged to the territory that became part of India after the 15th day of August 1947, who is a child or grandchild or a great-grandchild of a citizen of India or a person referred to in clause A or B, who is a spouse, who is very, very essential to note. Please note here that not only citizens, but also not only the ex-citizens, but also the spouses of the foreign origin of a citizen of India or spouse of foreign origin of a person referred to in clause A, B, and C are included. So for it is also, it goes to include the spouses as well. Now, for this regulation, PIO includes overseas citizen of India cardholder. We are going to discuss this once we have seen the definition of OCI. Now, the definition of OCI, if you see, they are defined as the person resident outside India who is a registered as overseas citizen of India cardholder under 7A of Citizenship Act 1955. And there are following categories of foreign nationals are eligible for registration as OCI cardholder: who are citizen of India at the time of commencement of Constitution, who are eligible to become a citizen of India as on 26th of January 1950, who belong to a territory that became part of after 15th of August 1947, who is a child or grandchild or a great-grandchild of such a citizen, and who is a minor child of such a person mentioned above, and who is a minor child and both parents are citizens of India, and similarly spouses of these people who are and one more condition here regarding the spouse is that whose marriages are registered and subsisted for a continued period of 2 years immediately preceding the presentation of the application with regard to the getting of OCI card holder. So these are, if you see the definition of PIO and OCI, they overlap somewhere. Overseas citizen of India basically includes everything which is there in PIO. So effective from 6th of January 2015, these two terms under the Citizenship Act 1955. So these two terms, that is PIO and OCI, were clubbed together. So these two terms were clubbed together to make one term of overseas citizen of India card holder. So overseas citizen of India card holder. So there were a lot of fuss regarding that what happens to the applications which are pending, what happens to the people who have not taken the overseas citizen of India card. So these are, so by default, PIO was subsumed in the overseas citizen of India definition, and those people who are construed as the PIO are by default construed as the OCI card holders. So that is where it stands today, that PIO and OCI are one and same thing. However, under FEMA, it is taking time to transition. So at many places like acquisition and immovable property in India, through NDI rules, they have replaced the term PIO. So at lot many places, they have replaced the term PIO, where whatever is getting revised, therein they are replacing the term PIO with OCIC cardholder. However, at many places it is still existing. The term PIO still exists. Now, as far as FEMA is concerned, there is no much difference between NRI and OCI. There is no much difference between NRI and OCI because OCI are given equal rights. OCI are given equal rights in terms of economic, financial, and educational rights. So if it is economic, financial, and educational rights, they are given equal rights, and also they are given equal rights in investment into India. So there had been recent, not amendment. So if you see the FDI policy as it stands on August 2017, and the new foreign exchange management, new debt instrument rules 2019, that is notified on 17th of October 2019. So those rules, they include wherever NRI can invest, OCI also can invest. NRI, wherever NRI can invest, OCI also can invest. So basically OCI have been given all the powers, all the rights, we can say, or we can say all the privileges that are available to the non-resident Indians. Very essential for us, although, to understand the difference between these terms, because at places it may so happen that there are few rights that are specifically kept for NRIs and not for OCIs, because NRIs are the citizens of India and OCI are not the citizens of India. So with this, we have come to an end with regard to the basics of FEMA with regard to non-resident Indians. Non-resident Indians. Let us go and understand the investments that a non-resident can make in India. Investment that a non-resident can make in India. So there is Mr. Ramdev. He had a business in India and he shifted to Australia in 2015. So now we are just discussing that Mr. Ramdev, he is standing in front of you. He had a business in India and he shifted to Australia in 2015 and he is a resident there right now. So presently he is a non-resident Indian. As per the NDI rules, as per deposit rules, he is a non-resident Indian. Now he has around 1 lakh USD and he wants to make investment in India. He has 1 lakh USD and he wants to make investment in India, but he's totally confused where he can make investments and how. He doesn't know. So what he does, he finds you, a chartered accountant from ICICI Vellore branch to guide. So he approaches you, and so that's how. So you call him to your office. So you've called him, Mr. Ram. So you have called Mr. Ramdev to your office, and you said, let's discuss that you have come to India and for a short period, and so you called him to your office so that you could help him to make various type of investments. Now you start explaining him that, look sir, there are a lot of ways in which you can make the investment. Now this is basically the investments in India are basically regulated by the Reserve Bank of India. However, there have been a certain recent shift in the powers from the Reserve Bank of India to central government. Now these powers got shifted from 17th October 2019. Previous to that, there was a TISPRO regulations that used to manage the foreign investment in India. Now it is the non-debt instrument rules 2019 that manages the foreign investment in India. And your investment will depend on whether it is in debt instrument or whether it is in non-debt instrument. If it is in debt instrument, it is regulated by the Reserve Bank of India. And if it is a non-debt instrument, it is regulated by the central government. Now, non-debt instrument will mean something like equity instrument, the LLP, partnership contribution, investment in investment vehicles, and debt instrument will mean redemption, redeemable preference shares, something like that. So you are telling him all that stuff. He is thoroughly confused. He is not able to understand anything at all. So you try to explain him in this fashion. Sir, you can make the investment in two ways. Non-debt instrument, you can make investment in non-debt instruments, or you can make investment in debt instrument. It depends on your objective. So he was confused. He was sitting in your office and he was very confused. Now you are throwing the jargons and he is absolutely not able to understand. So he tells you, sir, please use different language. Please make me understand where I can make investment in a simple language. So you try to make him understand that he can make investment in two ways, debt instrument and non-debt instrument. It depends on his objective. It depends on the objective of NRI, what he wants to drive from India. What is his intention? What is his objective? What is his purpose of investment? That will drive the whole investment in India. As far as India is concerned, so you tell him that as far as India is concerned, it's an open area for NRIs. It's an open area for NRIs. We don't only give the platforms in various types of platform. We also give the tax incentives. So he said, sir, please explain to me what are these things. Now let us understand the non-debt instruments in which the investment can be made. So there are various types of investments that can be done by the non-resident Indian in India. It depends on his objective, and this is mentioned, specified in various schedules of Foreign Exchange Management Non-Debt Instruments Rule 2019. So it has 10 schedules. The Non-Debt Instruments Rule has 10 schedules, and each schedule works in a silo. So an investment which is coming in one schedule does not talk with the investment which is coming in second schedule or third schedule or fourth schedule. So there are, out of the 10, in most of the schedules, NRIs can make investment. In most of the schedule, NRIs can make investment. However, as I said, in what schedule the NRI wants to make investment will depend on his objective. So let us now devote another 20 minutes to understand what are these schedules in which the NRIs can make investment. NRI can make investment in Schedule 1 of Foreign Exchange Management Non-Debt Instrument Rules 2019 in the form of FDI. So I'll be discussing these schedules and the pros and cons of falling into each schedule, and we'll be taking up the questions 15 minutes prior to the closure of this lecture. So they can make the investment in equity instruments of the Indian company. They can make the investment. NRIs as well as OCIs can make the investment in equity instrument. What are these equity instruments in which these people can make investment? Like your equity shares, partly paid equity shares, the compulsorily convertible debentures, compulsorily convertible preference shares. So for individuals, they can make investment in equity shares of the Indian company. If they are coming under the Schedule 1, they can come under the automatic route, or they can come under approval route. So what we are discussing right now is the first schedule, that is known as FDI schedule. Now, FDI schedule is the most open schedule in the sense that the whole of the investment in an unlisted company is construed as the FDI, and it can come into two routes. One is automatic route and one is approval route. It depends on the sector in which the NRI wants to invest. Now, if the NRI wants to invest in a sector, broadcasting sector, in a company which works in a broadcasting or wants to open something in broadcasting, in that case, he has the business can be opened with the prior approval of Government of India. However, if the NRI wants to invest in a service sector or any other sector in which 100% of FDI is permitted, there is no approval from Reserve Bank of India or Central Government of India is required. However, if the NRI wants to invest in these sectors, he cannot make investment in these sectors. If he is coming under Schedule 1 and FDI under Schedule 1, he cannot make investment in atomic energy or railway operations, lottery, gambling, betting, trading in TDRs, real estate business, manufacturing of tobacco and tobacco substitutes. So in these sectors, the investment cannot be made by NRI because these are the prohibited sectors. So if these sectors, if he wants to come in these sectors, better he doesn't come because it is not allowed. So he will not be, so you can tell him that it is not allowed to be invested. I will give you another option. Under automatic route, so it is that it's a simple route. The company will allot shares if the within 60 days of receipt of funds, within 30 days, it will file from FCGPR at the firm's portal, at the RBI firm's portal. And one of the thing with this route is that there are pricing guidelines that needs to be satisfied. These are the pricing guidelines that needs to be satisfied. And there is an FLA return that the Indian company has to file every year by end of July, 15 July every year. This year it is 31st of July. Now, if the sector is falling into the approval route, in that case, the prior approval, the NRI will be able to apply only if he has taken the prior approval from the concerned ministry. Now, if it is the mining, it will go to the mining industry. If it is broadcasting, it will go to the telecom industry. The active industries are allotted that in which sector the investment is taking place. So if it is, and there are certain sectors in which are of security reasons, for the security reasons, and which are of national security interest, they are referred to the Ministry of Home Affairs as well. So if he wants to invest in defense sector, whether NRI under FDI route, which goes in the approval route, then the concerned ministry along with the MHA will be referred the application, and then only the approval of the application will be given. So what we are talking here is that the first schedule of the investment in which the investment can be made by NRI. So NRI can make investment in Schedule 1 of the NDI Rules 2019 as a FDI, that is foreign direct investment. Under FDI, the sectoral cap needs to be followed, the pricing guidelines needs to be followed, and the reporting also needs to be done. He gets very scared. Your NRI client, he gets very scared that FDI, first of all, there is so much of prohibition in the sector. I cannot invest in so many sectors. After that, I have to follow the pricing guidelines, and the Indian company needs to report. I am not here for staying long. I want to invest in the listed Indian companies. I want to invest in the listed Indian companies, and I want to gain from the I want to gain from the listed Indian companies. I don't want to come as a FDI. Now he asks you, do you have any option? Do you have any option wherein I can invest in the listed Indian companies? So you tell him, yes, I have an option. You can come under Schedule 3. Instead of Schedule 1, you can come under Schedule 3. So he gets happy that, okay, I can come under Schedule 3 and I will invest as much as I want. I will invest as much as I want. So you tell him, no, you cannot invest as much as you want. You can only invest till 5% of the equity capital on a diluted basis. Also, it is a delivery based buying and selling which is allowed in case of a listed company. So the NRI investment under Schedule 3 can be done in a listed company. However, the investment is limited to 5% per NRI. Then he got little confused. He asked you that how will anyone come to know whether I have invested 5% of the paid up capital of the company? How does it happen? Then you tell him that there is a system. Then you know most of these NRIs, they have a different view about the country as well. So you'll have to tell him that there is a system that is created by Reserve Bank of India along with SEBI, which maintains the investment that is done by NRIs and FIIs on a daily basis. And as soon as the investment by NRI in a company reaches the red flag limit of below 3%, it sends signal to the depository as well as to the exchanges. And beyond this, whatever investment by NRIs or FIIs will happen will be on a permission basis. So a company will be notified, the exchange will be notified, the depository will be notified that the company is in a red area, that the investment are increasing in the company. This investment, he said, no, but I want to make more investment in a listed company only. What he says that I want to make more investment in a listed company only. Then you take him to the fourth schedule. You take him to the fourth schedule of NDI rules. Then you tell him that you can make investment as much as you want. However, you can make investment only on repatriation basis, non-repatriation basis. You can make investment only on non-repatriation basis. Then what exactly is repatriation and non-repatriation? So on a repatriation basis, so what we are discussing, then he comes to you and he tells you that I don't want to limit my investment till 5%. I want to invest as much as I like in a listed company. Then you tell him that then you cannot come in Schedule 3. You can come only under Schedule 4 because there is no limitation. You invest as much as you like. You invest in a listed company, you invest in an unlisted company, you invest in any sector apart from the sector which I tell you, just that you will have to, you will not be able to invest in few sectors, otherwise you are very free. Just that you will have to invest in a non-repatriation basis. So what exactly is a non-repatriation basis? Non-repatriation basis means, it does not mean that you will not be able to take out of India anything. See, non-repatriation basis means that whatever investment has come, it can go. What cannot go? What cannot go? Sorry, I did the opposite. So on a repatriation basis, what happens that whatever amount has come to India plus your interest, dividend, current income, principal gains, everything can go. Everything can be remitted outside India if the investment has come on a repatriation basis. However, if the investment has come on a non-repatriation basis, in that case, only interest, dividend and current income can go outside India. The principals and gains on investment cannot be repatriated outside India. Cannot be repatriated outside India. Now, the question is, who will decide this, whether the investment should come on a non-repatriation basis or on a repatriation basis? As I started, it depends on the objective of the NRI himself. It depends on the objective of NRI himself, whether he wants to invest on a non-repatriation basis or he wants to invest on a repatriation basis. However, under Schedule 4 of NDI rules, he can come in listed company, unlisted company. He can come and he can invest in a trust, partnership firm on a limitless basis. There are no limits to his to the extent to which it can invest. However, the businesses in which he cannot invest, there are businesses in which he cannot invest, like Nidhi company, agricultural and plantation activity, real estate business, dealing in TDR. These are the 4 things which are not allowed. However, what happens that when we talk about the real estate business, the first thing that comes to our mind is that real estate business is not allowed. So we have to understand that real estate, first we need to understand how the real estate is defined, how the real estate is defined to be excluded. If you see the real estate business, mostly everywhere it is defined to mean only the selling and buying of the property and gaining out of it. Only gaining from this buying and selling of property. At most of the places, real estate activity which is not allowed is limited to this activity. So most of the other activities are allowed. So you can accordingly guide your friend who is an NRI and who is your customer. Apart from this, one thing that I would like to draw your attention to is that the NRIs under Schedule 4, they can invest not only by themselves but also by the company partnership trust that is owned and controlled by them. That is owned and controlled by them. However, in case they are investing into the mutual fund units, or they are investing into the partnership or proprietary firms. In that case, it is only the NRI and OCI themselves who are permitted to invest. It cannot be done through their entities. It cannot be done through the entities which are controlled or owned by them. Other instruments in which the investment can come in Schedule 4, equity instrument of listed and unlisted companies, unit issued by investment vehicles, contribution to capital, convertible notes. We are going to deal with convertible notes. Unit of domestic mutual funds on a non-repatriable basis, which invest more than 50% in equity. So he was pretty okay that I will be investing in the Schedule 4. Then he says, no, but then you'll have to tell me, how do I get my funds? How do I get my funds? So we will talk about it, the mode of investment. The mode of investment, sales proceeds, we are going to talk in detail about it because it is dependent on the way you want to take back the funds. How you should bring in the funds depends on how you want to take back the funds. There are 3 accounts, NRE account, FCNR account, NRO account, that we will be discussing later on. So what we are talking about, the various avenues that are available to NRIs for their investment in India. So your NRI customer, your NRI client, he says that because of the particular structuring, that because of the tax benefits that is available to LLP, I want to invest in a LLP. whether it is allowed. So any investment in LLP is allowed under Schedule 6 of the NDI rules. However, the LLP should be into 100% automatic route, and there should be no FDI linked performance conditions. Otherwise, there is no prohibition on investment in LLP by the NRIs or OCIs. As we all know that the people or entities from Pakistan or Bangladesh and now the land bordering countries of India cannot make the investment without the government route. It cannot be in FDI, it cannot be in LLP, it cannot be there without until unless it's in the government route. So the sectors in which the LLP is prohibited, like the sectors in which are permissible only under government route, sectors which are not open for FDI, sectors with performance linked conditions, agriculture, plantation, print media, private security. So these are the sectors in which the NRIs cannot invest. If there is a conversion that is required from existing company into LLP, it can only be in the sectors in which there is a 100% FDI is allowed and there are no performance linked conditions. So this is regarding the Schedule 6. That means if the investment needs to come in LLP, it can come by following the conditions that are specified in Schedule 6. So what are these conditions? One of the major conditions that is there in Schedule 6 as well as in Schedule 1, as we had mentioned, is the pricing guidelines. What are these pricing guidelines? We don't have to apply too much of ourselves to understand these pricing guidelines. It's a simple logic that when the investment is coming in India, when the money is coming in India, we try to fetch the maximum, and when it is going out of India, we try to give the lowest. That's a simple funda. There is a floor and there is a cap. There is a floor price and there is a cap price. So putting this into more of a legal language, if there is a transfer of shares, if the non-resident is acquiring the shares from the resident, then the price at which this transaction can happen cannot be less than the fair market value, which is arrived at by following the internationally accepted methodology, So there is a floor price when we are talking with regard to transfer from resident to non-resident. Now, vice versa, when we see that if a non-resident is selling the shares to resident, so in that case, resident is making the payment. In that case, there is a cap price. There is a cap price that goes to say that the price at which this transaction can happen cannot be more than the price with the fair price that is arrived at by following the internationally approved, internationally accepted valuation methodology. Now there is a certificate from a chartered accountant that needs to be taken to the effect of this valuation. It can be taken by a chartered accountant, cost accountant, or a merchant banker. So this is, and then there are reportings also. Schedule 6 should be seen equivalent to Schedule 1. Just that in Schedule 1, it talks about the investment into company. And when it comes to investment in Schedule 6, it talks about the investment in LLPs. Otherwise, all the conditions remains almost the same. Now, this NRI friend, he wants to particularly invest into real estate sector. He says that I am not bothered. I want to invest in the real estate sector. So you tell him, sir, this sector is prohibited. You cannot invest in real estate. Then he says, no, you come out with anything. I want to invest in real estate only. So you bring him to Schedule 8. What do? You bring him to Schedule 8. You then tell him that our RBI has given another window in the form of Schedule 8, through which you can invest in real estate. Now, what is this window? There are investment vehicles in the form of REITs, in which AIF, what it does is that it works like a mutual fund. For example, REITs. What it does that it deals in a units of real estate, and then whatever the investor will invest in a REITs, it will not directly invest in the real estate. It will not directly invest in the immovable property. It will invest in the REITs. It will invest in REITs, and the REITs will in turn invest into various units, and the gain out of it can be then repatriated to your NRI client. So even this is particularly for the sector which are prohibited, like the sector that is real estate, and it was allowed in India after a very long time. It was a concept that was there, the concept of REITs that was there for a very long time outside India. However, in India, it was introduced very late, and it was introduced late, and it has not made a progress also, that much of a successful progress. In 2019, the concept was introduced in 2014, and the first REIT that got registered was in 2019. So because the cost structure is very complicated and not many people want to engage in those structures, and also this REITs as an investment vehicle, or in which they are required to be registered with many registered regulatory authorities like SEBI, RBI. So those bottlenecks are there. Therefore, they have not been able to be that successful as an investment class. So investment vehicles have not been able to be very successful as per the investment class. However, it is something which is available for the investment by NRIs, and the investment can be done. So what we have spoken is all the schedules under NDI rules in which the investment can be done by non-resident Indians. Apart from there, see, again, just to give you a brief, if it is Schedule 1 and if it is Schedule 6, there are pricing guidelines, there are pricing guidelines to be followed, there are reporting requirements, there are sectoral caps. However, if the investment is coming in Schedule 4, that is on a non-repatriation basis, if the investment is coming on a non-repatriation basis by NRI, in that cases, there is absolutely no requirement, no compliance at all. So their investment is treated as a domestic investment. So in case any investment in any instrument is coming by NRI on a non-repatriation basis, in that case, there is no compliance requirement, there is no pricing guidelines to be followed, and there are no reporting requirements. So it will depend mostly on the purpose, the objective. Now, if the person wants the money to be outside India, if a person wants to money because he plans to settle outside India, he may not like to invest on a non-repatriation basis. However, if he ultimately wants the money to be in India, to be parked in India, he may very well like it to be under the non-repatriation route. So it depends, as I said, on the objective. Apart from this, there is another window which is there in the form of debt instruments which is available. And the NRI or OCI, they can invest in the following instruments, that is government dated security or treasury bills or units of mutual funds, exchange traded securities which invest less than or equal to 50% in equity, bonds issued by the PSUs, bonds issued by infrastructure debt fund, listed non-convertible redeemable preference shares or debenture issued in terms of these regulations. So listed non-convertible and redeemable preference or debentures, very popular instruments, have been used very widely because they are not it's not, because the listing is independent of the equity shares listing and doable by following the non-rigorous route. Also, the investment by NRI, they can also subscribe. The NRIs are allowed to subscribe in the NPS scheme. They are, apart from that, they can also invest on a non-repatriation basis in all government securities, again, treasury bills, and then they can also invest in on a non-repatriation basis also without any limit on a listed non-convertible redeemable preference shares, or they can also invest in the chit fund that are registered with the registrar of chits. Now here a very significant change that to be seen is that although the sector is prohibited, the investment in chit funds is prohibited. However, the NRI can invest into chit funds on a non-repatriation basis if the chit fund is authorized by the registrar of chits or an officer authorized by the state government in this behalf. So whatever has been invested can also be sold. Now let us devote 5 minutes in understanding, or we can take it tomorrow as well. Let us take the questions. So we can take it rest of the things tomorrow regarding, so what we'll also be discussing regarding how the money can come. What are the various modes that are available to NRIs to make investment, and which mode they should use. So if they are making investment on a non-repatriation basis, there is no point that they should choose the NRE mode. They should always choose the NRO mode. So let us talk about it in detail tomorrow. Today we have tried to cover the basics as well as the residential status and the various types of investment that can be made by the non-resident Indians in the or OCI in India.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, one of our members has raised a question asking whether investment in partnership firms in India can be allowed on repatriation basis.
Sorry. Can you say it again, please? There is a, I think this also provides the GoToWebinar provides a window for the questions. So if they like, they can also raise it there. You can ask me.
Ma'am, can a NRI invest in a partnership firm on repatriation basis?
No. NRI can invest in a partnership firm on a non-repatriation basis only.
Okay. And one more question, ma'am. FCGPR, FCGPR, in the case of investment in companies, what is the document required to be filed in the case of investment in partnership firms in India?
What are the documents required for the, so FCGPR is particularly for equity instrument that are allotted for the person resident outside India by the company in India. So as far as the partnership is concerned, it can take the money only from non-resident Indians and also on a non-repatriation basis only. However, there are no forms that has been specified until unless it is an LLP. So in case of LLP, there are forms LLP 1 and LLP 2. However, in case of a partnership form, there are no forms that have been specified.
So regularly in a partnership firm, we used to have a class, ma'am, stating that if at all, if a partner has invested any money in the firm, he can take an interest up to 12%. Whether that interest, whatever that is being credited to his account, it can be repatriated, and to what extent it can be repatriated.
Okay, can you say it again, please?
Ma'am, the interest element which a partner gets from the partnership firm, that amount can be repatriated or not is one question. And if it can be repatriated, to what extent? Is there any monetary limit for the repatriation of that interest portion?
No, so investment can come only on a non-repatriation basis. It cannot come on a repatriation basis.
Interest element, ma'am. Interest on partner's capital.
Okay.
Whether the interest on partner's...
Okay. So there is no regulation that specifies that how much interest can be paid. However, it has to be in looking into the fact that it has to be at arm's length. It has to follow the transfer pricing regulations.
Okay. Ma'am, can a chartered accountant who is not a registered valuer can value shares for the purpose of FEMA?
Vamsi ji, there is a lot of confusion here that is people, professionals are facing. Let me clarify here that registered valuer, they have been made compulsory only at two locations right now. One is Investment in Companies Act and second is valuation under Companies Act and valuation under IBC. So apart from these two places, that is valuation under Companies Act or valuation under IBC, that is Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016, at all the places, it is the same valuation which was required to be done earlier. It stands as it is now. So a chartered accountant can very well give a certificate under FEMA wherever it is mentioned, and he can give the valuation certificate as it is required. So there is absolutely no requirement for a chartered accountant to be registered valuer to give valuation certificate under FEMA.
Ma'am, what are the consequences if an NRI invest in real estate under FEMA?
So consequences under FEMA, they are mentioned in section 13, which says that any amount, for any contravention under FEMA, it will depend on whether the amount is quantifiable or it is not quantifiable. So if it is, they can levy the penalty of 3 times the amount of contravention, which goes to say that if an NRI has acquired agricultural land but 10 crore in India, the penalty the RBI can raise is till 30 crore. So that's the amount of consequences that we are talking about.
Okay. Ma'am, apart from agricultural land, can an NRI invest in normal house property or a commercial property? In a commercial property or a house property?
Yes. See, the only two things that the investment cannot happen are agricultural land and the plantation. They cannot invest in agricultural land and plantation farmhouses. So that is where they cannot invest. They can invest very well in residential property, commercial property, or anything else. Even the non-agricultural land can be acquired by them.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Shravan? Are there any questions? Ma'am, is NRIs can investment in it? Ma'am, NRIs can investment in a company where company is carrying real estate business? Is NRIs can invest in a company?
No.
He can.
No. That is not allowed in any of the schedule. Even on a non-repatriation basis, that is not allowed.
Okay. Ma'am, I think the questions were up. Maybe we will have another question and answer session tomorrow, ma'am. I thank personally for you for being on this webinar, ma'am.
Yeah. So, in fact, if there are questions, what I would suggest that I think Mr. Vamsi, he's already added me in the group. You can always keep asking me. I'll take it up tomorrow as well. So no problem. From wherever, not only NRI, but also from wherever under FEMA, if you have any queries, we can take it up.
Thank you, ma'am. Arun.
Thank you very much, madam. And I think all of us has been clarified about basics of this NRI taxation, NRI under FEMA. And there are no further questions, madam.
Okay. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll join tomorrow.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. We will be seeing tomorrow by 5 o'clock.